Hello everyone, this is Damon with Easy Green Screen, and in this tutorial I'm going to be doing an extraction from a darker blue screen where the person has light blonde hair. And when doing extractions from a blue screen, it's not simply just doing a different color than if you were doing green screen. There are some technical differences as well, and blue screen can require a little bit more touch-up at times. And you can see in this extraction the hair looks pretty good. And really this technique that I'm going to show you, it's pretty simple if you know how to do it. It takes me on average a minute to 2 at the most per image. So I'm just going to zoom back out here and I'm going to undo this. Control Z to undo the extraction. And the first thing I'll point out is that blue screen tends to be a little bit darker than green screen, and that darkness can mix in the edge of your hair. And also, blue screen tends to be the exact opposite color as your hair color, so those colors can neutralize and leave you areas of desaturated areas around your hair. And that's a little bit different than what happens with green screen. So in this video I'm going to break down and show you what's going on and how to get a really good extraction with this type of a blue screen setup. So I'm going to zoom in here. And I always suggest zooming in and looking at your images zoomed in so you can see the individual pixels. That will give you an idea of what it is that you're working with. Now with blue screen, it tends to be quite a bit darker than green screen. So if we just sample this here, you see the brightness of our screen is 36%. It's staying right at 36 to 38%. So that's pretty dark. And typically blue screens tend to be a bit darker. A green screen will usually shoot at 50 to 60% brightness and sometimes even a little bit higher. So what happens is that brightness of that screen, or the darkness in this case, is going to mix with these hairs, because hairs are sub-pixel resolution by nature. The strands of hair are usually less than 1 pixel in width. And what happens is when you have single strands of hair, those hairs typically get more information from the background for their color than they do from the hair itself. So if we sample these individual strands of hair, you can see that these are still pure blue here with saturation of 100%, the brightness of 40. So the only thing in these strands of hair is we have a slight shift in the brightness, but those hairs are indeed turned blue by the screen. And if I zoom out here, when you look at this at about this zoom factor, your eyes see single strands of hair and you recognize those as blonde hair to match the hair color. But in reality, when you zoom into your image, that's not actually what is happening at a pixel level. Another thing that happens with blue screen, which is different than green screen, is we get color cancellation. And usually blonde hair is about 180 degrees difference in hue than the color of our blue screen. So those colors are more or less exact opposites of each other. So we'll get color cancellation. And what I mean by that is if we sample, let me find an area that I can see where it's happening. You can see our saturation dropped to 34% and we're still blue. So what's happening is as it starts mixing, your saturation starts dropping. And right there we've got 13%. I think I can probably find an area that's even more desaturated if I look hard here. We're down to 9% there. So what's happening is we're getting some areas that are turning almost gray. And right there we've got 4% saturation right in this area. So where you get those equal mixes, you start getting these gray shades. And in addition to that, you see the brightness is still low, down at 41%. If we sample the brightness of the hair itself, you see that the hair is, in that point, at 78%. So your screen is below 40 and your hair is getting close to 80% brightness. But what happens in some of these areas that we want to keep, and right there we see we have a saturation of 2%, a brightness of 52. So we're desaturating and we're darkening those areas. So just creating a transparency mask is not going to be quite enough to give us exactly the look we want. And let me show you here too. I'm going to actually sample the hair and I'm going to sample the screen. I'm going to show you what happens when these mix. So if I grab a paint bucket, I'm going to paint the hair color in, make a new layer, and we'll put the background color in here. So when these two colors mix together, as you start mixing more blue into that hair color, you see at a certain point those become neutral gray there. So this is quite a bit different than how green screen works. Green screen, you get a very predictable color gradient where those mix, and the software can target that to fix the spill. But the areas that get this neutral gray color, the software is not going to be able to target gray areas and just start adding color to those areas, because you would end up, if you did that, parts of the teeth and the eyes, you'd be unnaturally adding color as well as anything else that's neutral in the image. We are now going to extract the image. So I'm just going to make a selection before the extraction, and we are going to run this as a dual mask extraction. And when I do this, I'm being careful to just select the edges that have the hair and not the edges of the skin or that have just the uniform, because I only want to apply the dual mask settings to the edge of the hair. So we'll just run Easy Green Screen Dual Mask. And I'll first show you the mask. And the mask in the hair looks pretty good. There's a couple areas that I guess had blue reflections here, so we'll just touch those up real quick. Just lasso around those. Add to foreground with spill correction. So overall, I think the default settings worked pretty good for the mask. But there's more to doing an extraction than simply transparency. So if we look at this against the transparency, you can see those areas are really dark. That is because remember that blue screen mixed in with the hair in those areas where the screen was showing through, and you're really seeing the luminosity of that screen carryover. And remember I mentioned that blue screen is typically darker than green screen. So this is one of the things that's a little more challenging on blue screen, because green screen will shoot with a brightness of 50 or 60% usually on a green screen, and blue screen is often in the 30s for brightness. So let's look at this against the color, and I'll show you that if we change this color to black, you see that the extraction actually looks okay. And we do see where that blonde hair is desaturated. Now remember, when those colors mixed together with blue screen and blonde hair, they can cancel each other out and create areas of desaturation. And that's just a function of how the lighting is working. And we can fix that, but there are some things on blue screen that we may have to do that we don't have to do with green screen. And so I always recommend, if you can shoot green screen, shoot that. If you shoot blue screen, I'm going to show you how we can fix this. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into the edge hair coloring, and we're going to fix the brightness of these edge hairs. So if I just turn the brightness up, you can see those instantly brighten up. So when that screen mixed the darkness in there, we are re-brightening the edge of those hairs. And the software is not going to do this by default because it doesn't know what the hair color is you're shooting. If you're shooting black or brown hair, you might not want to do this because it might not look right. So this is something you're going to have to do based on your image. Now the blending width, this is how far in from the edge of the hair we're blending that brightness. And I'm just working my way in until I see it's about right. And there are some areas like on this uniform that were brightened up, and I'm going to show you how to fix that in Photoshop after we complete the extraction. It's really pretty simple. But in addition to us brightening the hair, if you remember those areas that were desaturated, well, we have a color blend opacity and a width, and we can even change the color we're blending. So the first thing I'm going to do is just change this color blending opacity up, and I'll turn the blending width up as well. Now you can see the edges of those hairs are looking blonde like they're supposed to look. And we can even go in and fine-tune the color of the edge of the hair. So if we just sample until we find a mix that works. Now if you're not in CC, you're not going to have this eyedropper tool. You can still change your color in CS5 or 6, but you're just not going to have this eyedropper tool. Anyway, I think somewhere in there actually looks pretty good, at least for the color. I'm going to turn down the color opacity just a bit. And so now if we go into our background, we'll see what happens if we brighten it more. And we can see now the hair looks a little bit too dark again. So depending on the background that you use, you will maybe have to adjust the brightness accordingly. So you see now with a brighter background, if I adjust the hair brightness up even more, it blends a lot better. Now when you're extracting something off of a very, very bright or a very, very dark blue screen, I don't suggest using a background that's white or that's even very bright. If you use a background that's, you don't have to use a real dark background, but something more middle range for brightness, then you don't have to get as extreme with these adjustments. And if you choose a background that's darker, then you might not have to make any adjustments at all. So that's one tip I'll make. If you select your backgrounds based on how you're shooting your images to match better, then you can get away from having to do some of these adjustments. So I'm going to turn this color back a little bit darker. So like I said, if you use something with a brightness of around 50% for your background, you can usually get away with making a lot less adjustment. And then if you shoot with a brighter screen, whether it's blue or green, but when your screen's got a brightness that matches anywhere from 50 to 60%, then you're not even going to have to make these adjustments to the edges of the hair. So anyway, I think that doesn't look too bad. I'm going to apply this and then show you in Photoshop how to make some final touch-ups. Now everything inside of Easy Green Screen is done in non-destructive layers. And so I'll just show you what that means. I'm going to turn all of these adjustment layers off, and I'm going to disable the layer mask. Now by doing that, we've got our original image back. So if you're familiar with Photoshop and layering, you can go and touch up everything manually after you've extracted. So I'm going to re-enable the layer mask. This first layer, you can see that we've now got all of that blue hair on the edge. This first layer, this is our automatic spill correction. And you can see that neutralized the blue, but it didn't do anything for those neutral gray areas where we had that equal mix of hair. The next two layers, these layers, the stray hair brightness and the stray hair color, those are the layers that we were adjusting when inside of Easy Green Screen. It was adjusting these layers, and that is clipped to the hair mask, only affecting the edge of the hair. So what we can do is if we have areas here where we see that those adjustments affected the shirt area, I'm going to go into this brightness layer. Then I'm going to grab a black paintbrush because we're painting in the mask of this layer. Need to turn my opacity up to 100% on the brush. But now what's happening is I am painting directly in this mask, and I'm painting that effect off. So I can go on each side of the image and paint that off. And you could also grab a white brush if you think you had to brighten more hairs, and you could paint those or paint that effect on. So up in the top of the hair here, I think it went in a little too far, so I painted that off. Now if you're going to paint this effect on, I suggest that you don't use a hardness up to 100. You turn that down just so that it blends the effect. But I'll show you here, we're still painting in the mask and we're painting white, but now you see we're brightening where I'm painting. So we're manually painting that effect on or off by painting white or black in this mask. I'll Control Z to undo it. Now you can still see some color in the edge of the shirt from this stray hair color layer. And I'll show you here if we can do the same thing. I'll just grab a black brush and we're painting that color effect off. So now that effect that we made to brighten the hair, we've painted that completely off of the uniform. And that's why I was careful when I made that selection initially. I only wanted to select around the edges of the hair and not around the edge of the bat, in as little of the uniform as possible. That way that effect only affected the edge of the hair. So now we see we've got a pretty good extraction, and I suggest that you try these techniques. And if you're interested at all in Easy Green Screen and you've never used it, please be sure to visit our website. That is easygreenscreen.com.